The rain fell steadily over the rolling hills of Victorian England, wrapping Ashcombe Manor in a veil of grey mist. The sprawling estate, with its ivy-covered stone walls and towering oak trees, stood as a symbol of wealth, power, and tradition. Every polished floor, every glittering chandelier, and every carefully trimmed rose bush reflected generations of aristocratic pride. Yet beneath its elegant appearance, the manor was ruled not by kindness, but by fear. The servants whispered the same warning to every newcomer. Do your work well, and never anger Lady Eleanor. Lady Eleanor Ashcroft, the widowed mother of Duke William Ashcroft, believed that compassion weakened people. To her, discipline was the only path to perfection. She expected absolute obedience from everyone in the household, especially the young women employed as maids. A crooked tablecloth, a dusty shelf, or a chipped teacup could earn days of punishment. No servant dared question her. Among them worked 19-year-old Clara Bennet. Clara was unlike the other maids. Gentle and soft-spoken, she carried herself with quiet grace despite wearing the plain grey dress and white apron of a servant. Her greatest beauty was her long chestnut hair that reached nearly to her waist. Every morning she carefully braided it before beginning her chores. It had been her mother's pride. Before dying from a winter fever years earlier, her mother had often brushed Clara's hair beside the fireplace. "Never let the world steal your kindness," she had whispered. "And never be ashamed of who you are." Those words remained in Clara's heart long after both her parents were gone. Now she worked tirelessly at Ashcombe Manor, sending nearly every coin of her wages to the village where her younger brother, Thomas, lived with an elderly schoolteacher. Thomas suffered from a weak leg after an accident, making it impossible for him to work long hours. Clara's earnings kept food on his table and medicine by his bedside. Although exhausted, she never complained. Even the oldest servants admired her. When the kitchen maid burned her hand, Clara quietly finished her work. When the stable boy fell ill, Clara carried soup to his room after dark. She never expected praise, only peace. But peace rarely existed under Lady Eleanor's roof. One autumn morning, excitement filled the manor. Lady Eleanor was hosting an afternoon gathering for several noblewomen from neighbouring estates. Every room sparkled. Crystal glasses caught the morning sunlight, silver trays gleamed, and priceless heirlooms were arranged throughout the drawing-room. Among them sat Lady Eleanor's most treasured possession, a delicate porcelain music box painted with tiny blue roses. It had belonged to her grandmother. She reminded every servant of its value at least 3 times before the guests arrived. "If anything happens to it," she warned coldly, "the guilty person will regret the day they entered this house." Clara lowered her eyes. "Yes, my lady." By early afternoon, elegant carriages rolled through the front gates. Ladies dressed in expensive silk gowns stepped into the manor, their laughter echoing through the grand entrance hall. Tea was served. Fresh cakes filled the room with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon. Clara moved carefully among the guests, balancing a polished silver tray carrying porcelain. Teacups and the treasured music box Lady Eleanor wished to display. Her hands remained steady despite the pressure. Outside, dark clouds gathered. Without warning, thunder cracked across the sky. The sound startled one of the younger footmen carrying another tray. He stumbled backward and collided with Clara. Time seemed to stop. The silver tray tilted. Teacups rattled. The porcelain music box slid toward the edge. Clara reached desperately for it. Her fingertips brushed the smooth painted surface. But it slipped away. The music box struck the marble floor. Crash! The delicate porcelain shattered into dozens of tiny fragments. Silence filled the drawing room. No one breathed. Lady Eleanor slowly stood from her chair. Her face had turned pale with fury. The noblewomen exchanged uneasy glances. Clara immediately fell to her knees. "My lady, I'm so terribly sorry. I tried to save it." Lady Eleanor stared at the broken pieces. "You tried?" Her voice was frighteningly calm. "That heirloom survived nearly 200 years. She stepped closer. And it lasted less than 6 months in your hands." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It was an accident." Lady Eleanor's expression hardened. "There are no accidents." She turned toward the servants gathered near the doorway. Everyone outside. Confused whispers spread through the household. Within minutes every servant stood silently in the stone courtyard despite the cold rain. The noble women followed out of curiosity. Clara trembled as Lady Eleanor appeared carrying a pair of large tailor's shears. At first, no one understood. Lady Eleanor stopped directly before Clara. "You value your appearance more than your responsibilities. My lady, please. You must learn that carelessness has consequences." Before anyone could react, Lady Eleanor seized Clara's thick braid. The sharp blades snapped shut. One long section of chestnut hair fell onto the rain-soaked stones. Gasps escaped from every servant. Clara cried out softly but did not resist. Again the shears closed. Again. Again. Within moments her beautiful waist-length hair was gone, replaced by uneven, jagged strands barely reaching her shoulders. Rain mixed with tears streaming down Clara's face. Lady Eleanor dropped the cut braid onto the ground. "Beauty," she declared for everyone to hear, "is wasted on careless girls." Not a single servant dared move. Even the visiting ladies looked horrified. Clara slowly bent down and gathered the severed braid with shaking hands. She held it against her chest as though mourning a loved one. Without another word, she quietly returned inside the manor to finish serving tea. That evening the household remained unusually silent. Some servants secretly cried for Clara. Others feared they might be next. Far away, a carriage rolled through the estate gates much earlier than expected. Inside sat Duke William Ashcroft, 31 years old, returning from London after concluding important parliamentary business. Tall, dignified, and respected throughout England, William was known not for cruelty but for fairness. Unlike many noblemen, he greeted servants by name and thanked them for honest work. As he stepped into the entrance hall, something immediately felt wrong. The servants lowered their eyes. No one smiled. The atmosphere was heavy with fear. William frowned. "What has happened here?" No one answered. Later that evening, while walking through a quiet corridor, he noticed Clara carrying fresh linens. She wore a scarf tightly wrapped around her head despite the warmth of the house. As she hurried past, one corner of the scarf caught against a door handle. The fabric slipped away. William froze. Jagged, uneven locks framed Clara's tear-stained face. She instinctively covered her head, but it was too late. The Duke had already seen everything. His voice became low and deadly calm. "Clara." She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. He took one slow step closer. His expression darkened with every passing second. Finally, he asked the question that sent fear through the entire manor. "Who did this to you?" Clara lowered her eyes, clutching the folded linens tightly against her chest. "It was my own decision, Your Grace," she whispered. William looked at her for a long moment. The answer was too rehearsed, too careful. Her trembling hands and swollen eyes told a very different story. "You are lying." She quickly shook her head. "No, Your Grace. You cannot even look at me." Tears gathered in Clara's eyes, but she forced a weak smile. "Please, do not ask any more questions." Before William could speak again, she hurried down the corridor and disappeared around the corner. The Duke stood motionless. For years he had trusted his mother to manage Ashcombe Manor while he handled Parliament, the family's estates, and affairs in London. But the fear he had seen in Clara's eyes was unlike anything he had witnessed before. Something terrible had happened, and he intended to uncover the truth. The following morning, William summoned every servant to the library. One by one they entered the grand room, where shelves of leather-bound books stretched from floor to ceiling. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows as each servant nervously answered his questions. "What happened to Clara's hair?" Every servant gave the same reply. "I don't know, Your Grace. I wasn't there. I cannot say." William knew they were protecting someone. Or perhaps they were afraid. Hours passed with no answers. Finally, the oldest servant in the household entered. Mr. Hawthorne, the grey-haired butler, had served the Ashcroft family for nearly 40 years. His hands trembled as he removed his spectacles. William spoke gently. "You have always been honest with my father, and with me." The old man lowered his head. "My lord, if I tell you the truth, I may lose my position." "You have my word." Silence filled the room. At last, the butler's voice broke. It was her ladyship. William's face hardened. Mr. Hawthorne told him everything. The broken porcelain music box. The public humiliation. The courtyard. The shears. The braid falling onto the wet stones. The servant standing helplessly while Clara silently cried. When the story ended, William could barely breathe. He slowly walked toward the fireplace, staring into the flames. His thoughts drifted back to his late father. As a little boy, William had once asked why noble families carried titles while ordinary people did not. His father had smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. A duke's greatest duty is not to command the weak, William. It is to protect them. Those words echoed through his heart now. For years, while he had been away managing the estate's affairs, his own household had become a place ruled by fear instead of honor. He clenched his fists. No more. That evening, Lady Eleanor dined alone in the grand dining hall beneath sparkling crystal chandeliers. She looked up as William entered. "I hear London concluded your business early." "It did." He remained standing. "I also learned what happened yesterday." Lady Eleanor calmly placed her teacup onto its saucer. "Then you know the servant destroyed a priceless heirloom." "I know she made an accident." "There are no accidents." William stared at his mother. "You cut off her hair." "I corrected her." "You humiliated an innocent girl before the entire household." "I taught every servant a valuable lesson." William's voice became firm. "No. You taught them fear." Lady Eleanor folded her hands. "Fear maintains order." William slowly shook his head. "Fear creates silence. It creates obedience. It creates suffering." Lady Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "You sound like your father." "I thank God for that." The room fell silent. For the first time in years, mother and son stood on opposite sides of the same principle. Lady Eleanor rose gracefully from her chair. "Our family has ruled these lands for generations. And if we continue ruling through cruelty," William replied, "our name will be remembered with shame." She stared at him with disbelief. "Have you truly chosen a servant over your own mother?" "I have chosen what is right." Without another word, William turned and left the dining hall. Behind him, Lady Eleanor stood frozen with anger. Over the following weeks, William quietly began observing Clara. She never complained. She never spoke bitterly about Lady Eleanor. Instead, she continued serving with the same gentle patience she always had. One cold morning, William noticed her leaving the kitchens before sunrise carrying a small basket. Curious, he followed at a distance. She crossed the gardens and entered the servants' cottages. Inside, she found Mrs. Ellis, the elderly laundress, coughing violently with fever. Clara prepared warm tea, lit the fireplace, cleaned the room, and left half of her own breakfast on the table before quietly returning to work. She asked for nothing in return. Another afternoon, William saw her mending the stable boy's torn coat by candlelight. The following evening, she secretly handed several coins to the gardener's widow so she could buy medicine for her child. She lived simply. Every act of kindness cost her something. Yet she gave without hesitation. William also learned about her family. Both of Clara's parents had died during a terrible fever epidemic years earlier. Her younger brother, Thomas, had been left unable to walk properly after a carriage accident. Nearly all of Clara's wages were sent to support him. She owned almost nothing herself. Not even a winter coat worthy of England's harsh weather. Still, she smiled whenever she could. William found himself admiring a strength no title could buy. The atmosphere at Ashcombe Manor slowly began to change. William ordered that servants receive proper meals, regular days of rest, and warm clothing before winter arrived. He insisted every servant be addressed politely. Gradually, the fear that had haunted the manor began to fade. Laughter returned to the kitchens. The gardeners sang while working. The stable boys smiled again. Even the oldest servants admitted they had never known such peace. Only Lady Eleanor remained unmoved. Watching Clara earn the respect of everyone in the household filled her with quiet resentment. She convinced herself that the young maid had manipulated William. One evening she summoned the estate steward. "I want Clara Bennet dismissed immediately." The steward hesitated. "Her Grace." "His Grace may object." "I did not ask for his opinion." Reluctantly, dismissal papers were prepared. The following morning Clara was called to the study. She accepted the envelope without protest. Her eyes filled with tears, but she bowed politely. "If this is her ladyship's wish, I understand." Just as she reached for the door, it opened. William entered. His eyes immediately fell upon the dismissal letter in Clara's trembling hands. "What is this?" No one answered. He took the document, read it once, then looked directly at his mother, who had entered behind him. "You arranged this?" Lady Eleanor lifted her chin. "She no longer belongs in this house." William calmly tore the papers into small pieces. The fragments drifted onto the polished wooden floor like falling snow. He stepped beside Clara. His voice echoed through the room so every servant standing outside could hear. "As long as I am Duke of Ashcroft, no innocent soul under this roof will ever be punished by cruelty again." The servants exchanged astonished glances. Some struggled to hide tears. For the first time in many years, hope returned to Ashcroft Manor. But William knew this victory was only the beginning. His greatest battle was no longer against injustice. It was against the pride of his own family. Winter settled over Ashcroft Manor with a quiet elegance. Frost covered the gardens each morning, and the bare branches of ancient oak trees stretched toward the pale grey sky. Smoke curled from the chimneys while servants hurried through the halls, preparing the estate for Christmas. Although life inside the manor had grown kinder under Duke William's leadership, a cold silence remained between him and Lady Eleanor. Mother and son spoke only when absolutely necessary. Lady Eleanor rarely left her private sitting room, convinced that William had betrayed generations of Ashcroft tradition by defending a servant. Pride had built a wall around her heart, and she refused to admit she had done anything wrong. Clara, meanwhile, continued her work as faithfully as ever. She never celebrated her victory over the dismissal papers because she did not see it as a victory at all. To her, peace inside the household mattered more than pride. She treated Lady Eleanor with the same respect she offered everyone else. Each morning she brought fresh flowers to her sitting room. Each evening she ensured the fireplace was warm before retiring. Lady Eleanor accepted these small acts without a word. One icy evening, a fierce snowstorm swept across the countryside. The wind howled through the trees, and snow piled high against the manor doors. As servants hurried to close the shutters, a loud crash echoed from the grand staircase. Lady Eleanor had collapsed. William rushed from his study. "Mother!" She lay unconscious on the marble floor, her face pale and her breathing shallow. The estate physician arrived within the hour. After examining her carefully, he delivered troubling news. "Her ladyship has exhausted herself. Her heart is weak, and the winter has worsened her condition." "Will she recover?" William asked. "If she is carefully watched, perhaps. But she must never be left alone." The household grew uneasy. Many servants remembered years of harsh punishment. Though they would obey any order, few wished to spend long hours caring for the woman who had frightened them for so long. Before William could assign anyone, Clara quietly stepped forward. "I will stay with her." William looked at her in surprise. "You do not have to." She offered a gentle smile. "I know. But she does." 4 days and nights, Clara remained beside Lady Eleanor's bed. She prepared warm broth when Lady Eleanor refused to eat. She read passages from beloved novels when sleep would not come. She changed cold cloths, adjusted blankets, and lit fresh candles during the long winter nights. Sometimes she sat silently by the window, praying for the woman who had once humiliated her before the entire household. William often paused outside the bedroom door. Each time he looked inside, he found Clara caring for his mother with the same patience she showed every person in need. Never once did she complain. Never once did she remind Lady Eleanor of the past. The sight filled William with quiet admiration. Several weeks later, Lady Eleanor slowly regained her strength. One snowy afternoon she awoke to find Clara arranging fresh roses beside the bed. For the first time in many years, Lady Eleanor truly looked at the young woman before her. Not as a servant. Not as someone beneath her. Simply as another human being. Her voice was weak. "Why are you here?" Clara smiled softly. "To help you recover." Lady Eleanor looked away. "I treated you cruelly." "You did. I shamed you before everyone." Clara gently nodded. Lady Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Then why, after everything I did, do you still care for me?" The room grew silent. Clara thought for a moment before answering. "My mother taught me that kindness only has value when it is offered without expecting anything in return." She stepped closer. "If I cared only for those who were kind to me, then my kindness would have no meaning." Those simple words pierced Lady Eleanor's heart more deeply than any accusation ever could. For years she had believed strength meant control. Yet this quiet young woman possessed a strength greater than authority. The strength to forgive. Tears rolled slowly down Lady Eleanor's cheeks. For the first time since her husband's death, she cried. A few days later, Lady Eleanor made an unexpected request. "Gather every servant in the great hall." The household assembled in silence. No one knew what to expect. William stood beside Clara near the front of the room. Lady Eleanor entered slowly, supported by a polished wooden cane. She looked at the faces before her, the cooks, gardeners, maids, stable hands, and footmen she had ruled through fear for so many years. Taking a deep breath, she spoke. "For most of my life, I believed discipline without mercy made a stronger household." She paused. "I was wrong." The servants stared in astonishment. Lady Eleanor turned toward Clara. "When I cut your hair, I believed I was protecting my family's honor. Instead, I disgraced it." She bowed her head. "I ask your forgiveness." A hush fell over the hall. Clara stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "You have it, my lady." Lady Eleanor reached into a small velvet box carried by the butler. Inside rested an elegant silver hair comb decorated with tiny pearls and forget-me-not flowers. "It belonged to my husband's grandmother," Lady Eleanor said quietly. "It has been passed through our family for generations." She gently placed it into Clara's hands. "I can think of no one more worthy to wear it." The servants broke into heartfelt applause. Many wiped tears from their eyes. Even William found himself smiling. Ashcombe Manor had witnessed something far greater than victory. It had witnessed redemption. Spring arrived at last. The snow melted, flowers bloomed across the gardens, and Clara's chestnut hair had begun to grow once more. Though shorter than before, it framed her face with quiet elegance. Life throughout the estate flourished. Servants worked with pride rather than fear. Children from nearby villages attended a small school William established on the estate. The elderly received warm meals throughout winter. Ashcombe Manor slowly became known across England, not as the grandest estate, but as one of the kindest. Visitors often wondered what had caused such remarkable change. Few knew it had begun with a single act of courage, and a single act of forgiveness. One golden evening, William invited Clara to walk through the manor gardens. Apple blossoms drifted through the air as birds sang from the trees. They stopped beside the small lake where white swans glided peacefully across the water. William turned toward her. "When I first returned from London," he said, "I believed I had come home to protect this estate." He smiled gently. "But it was you who saved it." Clara lowered her eyes. "I only tried to do what was right. And that is why." William reached into his coat pocket and removed a small velvet box. Inside rested a delicate sapphire engagement ring. "I cannot imagine my life without you." He knelt before her. "Clara Bennet, will you do me the greatest honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of happiness filled Clara's eyes. She whispered the answer William had hoped to hear. "Yes." Months later, church bells echoed across the countryside. The people of nearby villages gathered outside the old stone church to celebrate the wedding of Duke William Ashcroft and Clara Bennet. Clara wore a graceful ivory gown, and her chestnut hair, now grown long enough to be elegantly styled, was adorned with Lady Eleanor's treasured silver comb. As she walked down the aisle, Lady Eleanor watched with tears shining in her eyes. She no longer saw a servant. She saw the daughter she had never realized she needed. After the ceremony, William addressed the guests gathered beneath the bright summer sky. "My father once taught me that a title does not make a noble person." He looked lovingly at Clara before continuing. "Today I understand his lesson completely. Power can command obedience. Wealth can purchase comfort. But only kindness earns love." The guests applauded as Clara slipped her hand into William's. Above them, the bells of the village church rang joyfully across the green hills of England. From that day forward, the story of Ashcroft Manor was no longer remembered for fear or cruelty. It became a story of courage, forgiveness, and a simple truth passed from one generation to the next. True nobility is never measured by birth, titles, or fortune. It is measured by the kindness we show to those who have no power to repay it.